those of you that are joining us online for this Animal Task Force seminar, Sustainable Livestock Farming, What Does This Mean? So I'm Frank O'Mara. I'm the President of the Animal Task Force. In my day job, I'm the Director of Teagasc in Ireland, but here this morning to chair this seminar for the Animal Task Force. For those of you that don't know, the Animal Task Force is a public-private platform that combines research performing organisations or knowledge providers and actors from the private sector. Today we are going to talk about our topic for 2023, which is on the title of the seminar, Sustainable Livestock Farming, What Does This Mean? And we had a seminar or a symposium at the European Association of Animal Production meeting in Lyon in August on this topic, where we brought together some of the best scientific people working in this area, and now we are going to present some of the implications and some of the practices at farm level on this topic. The motivation for this topic was a number of reasons. First of all, we have the EU Framework Law on Sustainable Food Systems, which is due to be finalised shortly. And that is going to be an important piece of legislation in the European community. But it begs the question, what do we mean by sustainable livestock systems? And how do we define them? And obviously, how can we improve them? And what common ground can we find between different livestock systems that might contribute to the sustainability of all types of livestock systems? So policymakers, NGOs, consumers, the general food sector, and scientists, they all want to better define what a sustainable food system is. So that's, I suppose, what we are trying to address here in our topic this morning. So we're looking at what are the attributes of sustainable livestock systems, the trade-offs and synergies between different aspects of the systems and their interactions with other parts of the food system. We'll also explore how our current livestock systems can continue to evolve and improve to be more sustainable, and what methodologies we can use to assess the sustainability of our livestock systems. So we have a good program in place for this morning. I'm not going to read through all the program, but we have a number of presentations. First of all, we're going to have a summary of the symposium in Lyon, and that will be delivered by our first speaker, who I'll introduce in a minute. And then we will go on to a presentation from Claire Burry from the Commission in relation to public policies. And then we will have a number of presentations before we take a break for coffee. We will come back after coffee, and we will have some examples from practitioners as to what they are doing to improve the sustainability of their particular farms. And finally, we will finish with a panel discussion involving a number of the speakers from this morning and a number of people who will join us for the panel discussion. I will introduce them at the time. And there will be a good chance for you to ask questions and to have your say. And that includes the people who are watching online. We will collect your questions and we will ask them here in the room as well. So look, I will move on to our first presentation, which is by Jean-Louis Peyraud. And Jean-Louis Peyraud is former Scientific Director of Agriculture at INRAE, where he had responsibility for the animal production sector. He's also a past president of the Animal Task Force, and he's has a huge amount of expertise in the area of sustainable livestock production. So Jean-Louis is going to summarize the symposium that we had in Lyon just to set the scene for our morning here this morning. So over to you, Jean-Louis.
So I will try to summarize the symposium we have. It's difficult to synthesize a lot of information, and information coming from different points with different vision. So I try to develop a grid for reading this. We have 18 oral presentations with different topics. The first presentation gives a broad general view of sustainability, and after we have different different topic. We have information about environment, resource use efficiency. We have some information about animal welfare, about farm profitability, and concerning food security. Only half a paper, to be honest. You see on this slide that we have most of the paper deal with environment, 2 on social aspect of sustainability, and many paper to be on evaluation of the system and co-construction of innovation. So it's some of them concern the living lab approach. Because it's the EIP session, we have a common session with the livestock farming system. Thanks for this common session. It's great, I think. But during the symposium, there is also some session on animal health and welfare, and it's perhaps we have not so much information on animal health and welfare in our session. Concerning the effect of livestock on environment, during the first paper, coming from the agroscope, we saw that we have effect on climate change, resource use, soil, water and air, and biodiversity. And this graph came from a colleague from US, Thiel, and it is presented during the symposium. And you can see that for each impact, we can have positive effect of livestock and negative effect. Negative effect on this slide are in red, positive effect are in blue. And so the objective of research is to reduce the negative impact and to foster the most positive impact. So it's a question of livestock system, it's a question of how we manage the animals and how we manage the animals in the landscape. So this is the question. To read the different paper of the session, I built this slide. In a way to improve sustainability, we have different components, different pathway to make progress. The first one is efficiency, and a lot of work are published concerning efficiency. The objective is to maintain output with lower inputs, so it's so-called sustainable intensification, and we work at efficiency at the production unit level. What is a production unit? It could be one animal, it could be one herd, it could be one farm in a landscape. So we have different scale of production unit. And the objective is to increase its efficiency. It's interesting, but it's not sufficient to go to sustainable system, because reducing inputs, we spare some scarce resource, it's good, but it doesn't a way to recover the quality of ecosystem. So it's why we also need to develop some circular approach, or to interaction between production unit to some extent, to have a better improvement of ecosystem services by coupling the different cycle of nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus. It's also a way to be more efficient, probably. And livestock play a key role in farming at European level, or even at the world level, because livestock allow to translocation of manure and translocation of different biomass. So we have a sort of circularity between the plant sector and the livestock sectors. So circularity is interaction between production unit. And the last point, not least, it's diversity, and diversity is should be considered at different level, at the animal level or below animal, genetic level, animal level, farm level, system level. And this is very, very important to maintain a diversity of situation, because it's a way to win in resilience, which is a very important aspect of sustainability. And diversity could be also, and is, to be honest, also a goal in itself when we speak about maintaining biodiversity. So I try to read the session with these 3 key words. Concerning efficiency, we have two interesting papers when we put them together. It is to which level we need to consider efficiency. In the past, we don't consider efficiency in itself, we consider productivity, maximum output, whatever the level of inputs to be. And it is a way to make progress. It was a way to make progress, and we spare land, we spare inputs because we are more efficient to be. But this way of thinking increase feed food competition, notably, and we produce more intensive animals and less robust animals. So it's why the concept of efficiency was developed. The objective is still to reduce negative outputs of the livestock system, and we try to improve the efficiency of the animals, but it is difficult because measuring productivity is very easy. We measure the amount of milk, the body live weight gain. Efficiency is different because it's a ratio. So, for example, in this paper we have in the session is how we measure nitrogen use efficiency in pig. It's not so easy. Even measuring dairy co-efficiency is not so easy. This paper develop tools and proxy. And proxy, it's body live weight gain. It could be a proxy of nitrogen use efficiency. And we can also think about residual feed intake. But if we consider only the animal level for efficiency, we can draw some inconclusive consequences or wrong conclusion, because we need to consider other level. And it is in this paper, coming from France, the author produced two examples. The example of a dairy farm in Germany who will shift from conventional to organic farming. And for this farm, there is an increase in greenhouse gas emission per kilo of milk at animal level, enteric methane. But globally, there is a reduction in greenhouse gas because there is a lot of carbon storage in soil, which compensate. Another example is intensification of dairy system. It's good for enteric methane per kg of milk, but if we consider our diet, we eat milk and meat, and if we increase the productivity per cow, you need to increase the beef system, and beef system is less efficient, and in total, the global system is produce more greenhouse gas than the previous one. So it's just to show that we have some trade-off, and we need to think at different level in the same time. Concerning circularity and diversity, we have three papers. One was on how we can use, so it's typically a circular approach, how we can use livestock as a biocontrol tools to avoid pesticides in permanent crop, fruits production in France here. And you see that this paper show that we can use different type of animals, sheep, poultry, to reduce the pest effect on fruit yards or wine yards also, and sheep and for maintenance of grass under the tree. It's quite interesting. This paper shows also a lot of gap of science behind this and a lot of gap for future research. Another example is how we can use the diversity within the animal sectors to have a more efficient system. And this paper came from Africa and studies different systems worldwide and show that we can use different breeds, we can use different species according to the objective. And globally, from this paper, native breeds are much more efficient to produce ecosystem services than more intensive breeds. The last point is another example is how we can consider and use farm diversity to make progress. This work came from Ireland and show from a classification of farm in different groups, 7 groups, but the way to reduce greenhouse gas, the most efficient way to reduce greenhouse gas emission will be different according to the farm structure and the farm performances. So we need to adapt. We have all farms are the same tools, reducing greenhouse gas, but the way to reach the tool could be different according to the farm. It is one way to see how diversity could be used. Efficiency and circularity. 2 papers deal with this aspect. I put on this slide more than information of these 2 papers. If we want to reduce, for example, greenhouse gas, the objective is to have also some positive effect, positive trade-off or synergy, if you want, with other aspects. So we can work at animal and herd levels, at the levels of manure management, land use, or feeding practice to the herd. For this, for all this level, we can have practice which aim to improve efficiency, for example, low-emitting animals, more robust animals, decreasing slaughter age when we produce meat. For manure, it's all technique around smart use of manure, grassland management for land use, using of feed additive, for example, in feeding practice. So it is efficiency. But we can have circular approach. For example, for manure, it's development of bioeconomy of manure, of biogas production. From land use, it could be use of legumes and fixing plant, more grassland, agroforestry, crop diversification. And in the feeding practice, it's to use more legumes because we produce less methane with legumes compared to gramineous plant. So this is 2 papers showing that we can merge both efficiency approach and circular approach. And it is my vision, at least. It's not in the text, but we can reduce methane with positive effect on ammonia emission of fossil energy consumption, reduction of fossil energy consumption, increased protein autonomy, reducing feed food competition, biodiversity, and soil fertility. So the objective is to develop, thanks to circularity, efficiency, and diversity, positive approach for different criteria in the same time. Co-construction of innovation. This is the second point of the seminar. Here, it's 2 papers showing that working with stakeholders help to make progress. 2 examples. This is one very interesting is a linear approach in Sweden to develop new practice for farmers, well accepted by the society. And the second paper is about animal welfare index. Quite interesting paper also. Where the author tried to develop an index, developed both on the science basis and on society basis, and which is interesting, and it is a vision sometimes from vegan who said, we don't need to kill animals, but if you want to eat meat, it's better or less worse to kill a big animal as a cow than a chicken, because with a cow we feed a lot of person, and with chicken only a small amount of person. So he put in this index this vision. It is interesting, and please read this paper. It's the summary, at least it's interesting. The last aspect is how we measure sustainability. We have 2 or 3 papers on this aspect, presenting the different type of evaluation, both ex post, ex ante, for evaluation for policy advices, for farmers. It's different, so we need to develop different tools according to the objective and the public. And offshore, we have life cycle analysis, which is a very important aspect. The conclusion of this paper is probably we have a proliferation of tools, of indicators, which clearly it's a challenge for research. Too much method, too much indicators, sometimes different indicators for the same performances. So it's a huge job for Pathway, step up and over project. So we need to clarify this clearly. And another question is how we can aggregate the information to simplify, but keeping good information. One point was on how we can collect the data, and one paper for Fiona Thorne from Teagasc shows the important role of the EU FADN databases, which is very interesting, but this databases at the moment is mainly for economical aspect of sustainability and for the influence of the cap on farm economical performance. And Fiona claimed that we also need to use this tool to enlarge the tool with environmental and some other social aspects, in particular aspect linked to job, employment, profitability at territorial level, and from our environment, obviously greenhouse gas emission, biodiversity. So how we can improve these databases. And we have some paper about the flow on LCA, so I don't give many information because Hayo will present information after, but clearly life cycle analysis is a method which is quite interesting, but with some shortage. This method simplifies the agro-ecosystem only in the way of food production, but forgetting that at the system level, we have overproduction, soil fertility, biodiversity. We have also byproduct for animals, which are how we can consider byproduct for animals. It's not so evident. LCA also doesn't consider some social aspect. We have social LCA, but it's the same LCA we don't have. What about profitability, job, employment, and so on? And this method, as all method, is influenced by the methodological choices, and in particular the unit we used, kg or hectares, for example. And this improvement of LCA was one of the objectives of the Pathway project. Concerning the animal source food and in link to LCA is what is the unit we need to use, and there is more and more paper about functional units, and I represent here one of the results of this symposium, showing that if we rank the food according to per emission per kg of food or per kg of nutrient supply, the 5 most important nutrients which cover 1/3 of the daily human requirement, you see that the ranking is totally different. Palm oil is very not efficient at all in the second way of thinking, and the meat, for example, is less worst when we consider nutrient supply compared to only kg. So it is a matter at least of debate, what is the functional unit we need to use. And to conclude, we have a common definition of livestock sustainability to develop. We have different definitions at the moment, and I think we need to have a common vision of this. And beyond this, we need to consider that the concept of safe and just operating space, and this concept will be developed in the startup project concerning the livestock production, but it is also developed in other projects at European level, notably from economic and social sciences. So I list to finish some challenges for research. Concerning the research, I think that we need to embrace the complexity of the socio-technical system, so both the technical aspect but the social aspect, and it is not always the case. We need to recognize that there is no one way to reach the objective. We have different ways, according to the country, according to the farm, according to... So we need to consider this. We need to be clear on metrics, harmonization of method. Too much, I say, too much method, too much indicators, so we need to clarify this aspect. We need to combine efficiency, circularity, and diversity. I hope I convince you of this. We need to construct innovation, so it's not a process from science to the society, it's a common exchange to have acceptable solution for the society. We need to analyze trade-off and synergy between the different objectives, different way of progress, and we need to maximize synergy and to avoid trade-off and after, or to produce knowledge to make an approach and okay, we will go in this way. Okay, it's not the best, it's not fantastic, but it's better than another way. So to make choice. We need to consider global and local context. Again, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And we need to develop a more accurate and holistic method to evaluate the system. And we will discuss this point this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Louis, for summarising that and for setting the scene so well for us here this morning for the remainder of the seminar. I'm now delighted to welcome Claire Burry, who's Deputy Director General in DG SANTE with responsibility for food sustainability. So, Claire, you have a long and impressive CV, which I'm not going to read out, but you're going to talk to us this morning around public policies and give us where we're currently standing in relation to important public policies. So, Claire, over to you, please.
Okay, do you want to sit here?
As you wish.
Maybe I'll start there.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much, Frank, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be in this beautiful building. No, I've been in the dining room once. I was lucky enough to do that, but I've never seen this before. It's really fantastic, no? So if you get bored, you can always look up and kind of figure things out around there. But anyway, I'm going to speak for a few minutes because those who invited me, Frank, Anna, Susanna, and so on, wanted me, I think, to do a little bit of a stock take on where we are on Farm to Fork, the Farm to Fork strategy, give you the bigger view. I won't try and say how we can improve the life cycle analysis because I think that's something you're going to do for the rest of the day, you know, and thank you very much for that fabulous introduction. I think very, very helpful in terms of framing the debate. I work in DG SANTE, which is responsible for public and human and animal health. And so I will give you a take from a DG SANTE perspective in terms of the issues that we're really focusing on. But first of all, I want to say a few words about the Farm to Fork strategy in general and where we are with that. So I don't think it went, of course, unnoticed at all that in her State of the Union speech, Ursula von der Leyen said that we need a strategic dialogue on agriculture. And that was, I think, the combination of a number of months of debate around the Farm to Fork. I see Tassos, I didn't, at the back. So now I have to watch what I say, sorry. But this was, I think, the culmination of a number of months of discussion which had become more and more polarized about what we were doing on Farm to Fork. But she also said, and maybe, I don't know, personally I don't think there's any contradiction in it, but she also said, but the Green Deal remains and we are still working on it and we have to keep moving forward. So I think the question now is, how do we in this interim period, because we're moving very much into the period between two commissions, between two parliaments, you know, what do we do, what should we be doing, and how do we have this dialogue that Ursula von der Leyen has talked about. So I think if I go back to Farm to Fork, I mean, Tassos was there when it was designed. I wasn't. I arrived and it was sitting on my desk. But well, we've tried to make the best of it. But I think the other thing is that the objectives that were set there haven't gone away, and the need for change hasn't gone away. But the question is, how do we do it and when should we do it? Because, of course, there's been a lot of discussion around setting targets and is it possible to meet them and so on. So I think, that's what this dialogue needs to be about. But if I go back to Farm to Fork, it talked about sustainability via fair and just transition. And this, how do we create the fair and just transition has come very much back to the fore. Obviously, COVID, the Ukraine war, to a certain extent as well, and what's happening in the Middle East, and all the forest fires and the pests and everything have put food security back at the top of the agenda in terms of, how can we do this when we've got a situation where, for the first time in decades, food security has become, again, a real issue because the supply chains have been disrupted, inflation has meant that some people don't get access to certain foods and so on. So this wicked problem that we have, as people like to call it, hasn't really become any easier. But I think doing nothing is not an option. We can't stay still. We have to move forward, and there needs to be change. But as I said before, I think the question now is, how do we do that change, and when do we do that change? Because if we can do it, then it will make our agri-food chain much more resilient, and what we've seen, I think, shows to us very clearly that we need to do that. So I wanted now to zoom in a little bit on the livestock industry, because that's what you're most interested in. There are some facts which are very clearly out there, I think, in terms of what the livestock sector contributes to in terms of employing 4 million people, spread across all regions, and we're a net exporter on the world market. These are important things. It keeps us competitive. So we have to maintain that. But on the other hand, the role of a lot of the livestock industry is questioned because of the methane emissions, the need to import feed for animals, the animal welfare issues, health-related issues related to high consumption of meat. How do we, these are the questions that are out there. And if I look at it in terms of citizens' petitions, I think since they've existed, there have been about 10, and 7 of them are related to what happens in the agri-food chain. So we had the End the Cage Age, we've had now the End Fur Farming. I mean, these are constant reminders that citizens are concerned about what's happening in farming. I know that they're not always very consistent. No, they say one thing on the one hand, and then they go and do something else on another. But the politicians and the policymakers have to take account of what the public is telling them as well. But I think so. Very well why this discussion has become polarized, why it's become polemic. But if I go back to your Dublin Declaration, which I think has been a cornerstone of the work that you've been doing, it talks about a balanced view for the future of animal agriculture. So I think that balance is a good word. That's what we're trying to find. How do we get the right balance there? Which means we can change, but there isn't, and there's an evolution, not a revolution. And the other thing, and I think the presentation this morning shows how you contribute to that in terms of saying, look, let's do this in a rational way as well. Public opinion is telling us one thing, but we need to measure, we need to calibrate, and we really need to see how we can do this in a way which makes sense from a scientific perspective, which is very much about the work that we do in DG SANTE as well. So I wanted, just to close, to mention 3 areas where we're working at the moment, where to kind of update you. Obviously, on the animal welfare side, as I said, huge amount of pressure to do something. And we had, again, in the summer, a Eurobarometer survey which showed that 91% of people think it's important to protect the welfare of farmed animals to ensure they have decent living conditions. But as I say, okay, this is one desire that's expressed. It's not always easy to translate it, and the expectations are sometimes a bit far-fetched. But we also know that improving the animal welfare standards can contribute to sustainability. Of course, it's a question of seeing how, and that's where your measurement comes in. It's also, hopefully, we can improve animal health through better animal welfare. But again, we also need to be aware that when we change conditions, diseases react differently as well. So all those things need to be factored in. So the Commission had said in Farm to Fork, thanks Tassos for that, that we would reform the animal welfare legislation. It's very out of date. No, it's been in place for 20 years. It needs updating. Because the politicians wanted to be ambitious, a very ambitious piece of work was embarked on. But in our system here, of course, the Parliament and Council have been very, very busy for the last few years on pieces of legislation. There's still plenty on the table that needs to be finished. So I think the conclusion was it's no good putting another huge piece of legislation on the table at this point. Let's go for the areas where we think public opinion is really telling us they want to see something, but we think we can do something within the reasonable constraints that we have around costs, impact on the sector, etc. So what came out there was animal transport. We can discuss whether you think that was the right choice, yes or no, but I don't think the issue's not going to go away. A lot of work has been done, and I think the next commission will come back to it in terms of what happens on reducing cages and other areas around how animals are killed and so on. But it has to be this fair and just transition, and that's what we've been trying to do, reconcile the science, the public opinion, but also the economic impact that these measures will have. I should just mention, because it was mentioned by the colleagues when they asked me to come, that the framework on sustainable food systems is still work in progress. A prioritization has been made for the reasons that I said. We're end of mandate. There's only a limited political bandwidth at this point. So that will be also, I don't think the proposal is going to come this year. It's likely also to be for the next commission. So just to finish, a couple of issues where we're working quite hard. Highly pathogenic avian influenza. Unfortunately, it's got worse and worse. Of course, we can expect that through the winter it's going to be problematic too, but there are concerns about the fact that it might jump. We've already seen that it's moved into mammals, so the surveillance has been extended to cover mammals as well. We're working very closely with the colleagues on the health side to make sure that we do have a better, under this One Health umbrella now, surveillance of what goes on. We've been working very, very actively on vaccines, and they are starting to be rolled out in France. I think this is a good development. I hope it's going to make a difference, but of course it does have an impact on trade potentially, which means that we're also engaged. Colleagues are in the US this week as well, trying to explain why we think that the vaccination shouldn't have an impact on exports, because also we have the system of regionalization of our diseases, which works very well, which is quite effective, and which the US, New Zealand, others have accepted. So I think the answer lies partly in vaccination, but there's a lot of work to make sure that we get traction around that. And the last thing I wanted to mention is antimicrobial resistance, because I think it's still at the top of certainly the health policymakers' agenda. As you know, on the animal side, we have the veterinary medicines products regulation. We now have a very clear list of subjects of substances which are banned for use in animals because they have to be prioritized for humans. We're also working to make sure that we can apply this vis-a-vis the third countries. That takes a bit of time, but those arrangements will be put in place as well. And this is all, of course, contributing to the overall targets that TASOS set, 50% reduction of use of antimicrobials. And I think, we're making very slow progress. There are issues which have become polarized and difficult, but I think this dialogue that von der Leyen called for is needed because we want to be focusing on progress, not polemics. And meetings like yours today, I think, are very much part of how we can do that, really looking at what's happening on the ground, understanding it, bringing the science together with that, and then seeing how that informs the policy debate. So that's a bit the summary of where we are, what's happening farm to fork. And I'm here now to listen to you, because that's what these meetings are for, to hear what you think about where we are now on the Green Deal and European agriculture, and any other problems, questions, issues that you might want to raise. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Claire. And Claire, unfortunately, because she's a very busy schedule today, won't be able to stay with us for the panel discussion. So we might take a few minutes now just to have some discussion with Claire. So, Claire, thank you for that. You have a very, very busy agenda. Lots of things that you've touched on there: the animal welfare legislation, the framework law on sustainable food systems, the health surveillance, and antimicrobial resistance. So lots of issues there where a lot of work has been done in the legislative area to improve livestock systems. And I think, we all very much buy into that. But I suppose, you mentioned yourself, the debate is often not about how we improve livestock systems, but whether we should have them at all, would be some people's view. What's the Commission's kind of answer to people that come and say to you, look, we need to get rid of all these livestock farmers, stop bothering about them or pandering to them, just get rid of them?
I mean, very often when the NGOs come in, I think you need to be a little bit realistic, please, in terms of what to do, right? Because they... sorry, is it not close enough? Sorry, yes, is that better? Okay, so I try to be realistic, and rationalize the situation. I think what we have here is an opportunity to change things and instead of saying, we have to get rid of everything that we've got. I think the business case for doing things more sustainable is clear, no? And I think it's clear in the livestock industry as well. And if anything, what's happened over the last couple of years shows us how important food security is. I mean, that's what I was saying, no? So we have to maintain food security, but at the same time make the transition. But of course the argument comes, well, if I put myself on the other side, no? I mean, these are the people who are saying just get rid of it altogether because meat's not good for you and it's not, et cetera, no? And it's ruining the countryside and so on and so forth. If I put myself on the other side of things, which is to say, why should we change? Why do we need to change? I think, that's been more of an issue in terms of trying to get that side of things to engage. I mean, I think here you've obviously understood, no, you've got it, but it's very difficult. And actually, when I go to see the farmers as well, I've been a lot the last few months in the fields because we've been doing the sustainable use of pesticides work, no? And a lot of them get it at the sharp end, but they're just saying, but you need to give us alternative tools. You need to help us to make the changes. So I have said recently that I think one of the issues that wasn't really enough taken into account in Farm to Fork was the policy vision is there. Okay, it's a question of how ambitious the time frame was, but there's also how we're going to fund this, how we're going to make the difference. So some of it will come through changes that business make, which keeps them profitable, maybe even makes them more profitable because we set a kind of green standard here in Europe. But the other thing is we really need to think how we support our farmers through that transition. And there is, I think, a feeling that the cap doesn't get there because it's focused on other things. Okay, there are the eco schemes, but for the sustainable use, we had proposed to make a change to the cap to allow it to fund more, and that was very clearly rejected by the farmers and others. So I think we need to think about how public and private financing can work together now to make this transition.
Okay. And look, our I suppose central tenet is that livestock are part of an overall sustainable food system, and that there isn't one single optimum livestock system. Having that diversity of livestock systems is actually a strength. But I think, as you said, balance in the debate is critical. We have a question up here at the front, and by the way, I must say the Animal Task Force can't claim the credit for the Dublin Declaration. That was the organisers of the International Meat Summit. But anyway, we certainly agree.
But you subscribe to it now, so yeah, yes, okay.
We do. Well, we organised a seminar on the papers from that conference here in Brussels, and we very much agree with the tenet that you need balance in the debate, and that the debate should be based on science. So it's certainly very, very clear to us. Martin.
So it's on. Yeah.
Yes.
Morten Hetta from Sweden here. One concern that I think should be highlighted is the health of young people and their diet. So we are seeing that obesity is going up quite a lot, and actually the physical capacity of young people is much lower now than decades back. And if I'm looking in my lifetime, I can always got the message that you have to reduce the intake of livestock products and eat more and more vegetables. That is the message that still goes out there. But then you're looking at how the performance of young people, when they are tested for military service, etc., we see that there is a drop. And in general in Europe, there is a big problem, and in other developed countries as well, that we have unbalanced diets. We have iron deficit. We have too much fat, too much sugar. And the link between the public health and the food system, I think, should be enhanced, and we should have more focus on that. What is really the consequences of the change of diet on how we can perform as humans? That is something I would like to have some feedback on.
Okay, thank you for that, Martin. Claire, do you want to
Yeah, sure.
tackle that?
Okay, so I think you put your finger on a very good point, and I would think that in the next commission, the whole One Health banner is going to become even more important, and through that will be the link from public health to the food system. So I think at the macro level, people understand what you're saying. I think then the question is what happens at the micro level, because in Farm to Fork, there were thoughts expressed about diet and how diet should be improved and so on. But it's an area which is very sensitive, because immediately we start getting into competition between different diets. No, which is better? Is it the Mediterranean diet, or is it the Nordic diet? And of course, they have as their front labels the different types of food labeling that exists in those places. And we have rather found it difficult, I would say, from the European point of view, to come up with a scheme. That was something that was in Farm to Fork, no, about having an evaluative scheme. We can discuss how useful those schemes are. But my point I think I'm making is, what should we do at European level there then? I mean, how do you see Europe being constructive there and being able to make progress? Because we very quickly run into cultural differences between member states about what diets are good. And also, I think it was called gastro-diplomacy. That some member states were engaged in, no? Which is actually, I mean, open warfare, I think, would be a bit more friendly than the gastro-diplomacy in some respects. Sorry, I'm being very I haven't forgotten my British sense of humour, even though I've got a Belgian passport now. But I'm trying to be a little bit provocative now, because I fully buy what you're saying at the high level, but how do we translate that into some policy measures which will be useful and where we get traction? Of course, we can go around talking about the food environment and trying to nudge people, but does that really make a difference if Europe does that at that level? I don't know. I mean, I throw a bit the question back to you, Martin. If you've got suggestions about what we should do, I'm open.
Very, very quickly, Martin. Anybody else while Martin has given his response to that, if anyone else has a question, can you please raise your hand? Okay, sorry, Martin. Okay, and look, health is a very, very, if we think livestock is complicated, so too is health, and there's a whole load of things like exercise and that you know is very, very important as well. So we have a question over here from the people in the chat.
Yeah, we don't have a question in the room. We have a question in the chat. It is, do you believe that the transition for the livestock sector can happen without a strong protection against import products with lower standards? Will you push for reciprocity in animal welfare legislation and other?
Who was the question from? Sorry.
We don't know.
You don't know?
We have
Anonymity online, as usual, yes.
Yeah.
It's an online question.
Okay, no, I mean, not that it matters, because I think it's a fairly classic question. Exactly. No, I mean, it's one that we've been thinking about for the last 3 years. So, of course, we understand that if we're changing standards within the EU and it's a challenge for a transition for the farmers, then we have to build into that legislation a way of making sure that the competition from the outside is not déloyal, as they say in French. Now I use that word in this subject, or unfair. So this is now something, a couple of years ago, the Commission did a report, actually at the end of the French presidency, on the more general question of how do we do this and keep it compatible with the WTO standards. And the basic conclusion of that was, it's possible, but we have to do it on a case-by-case basis. So that's what we've been doing. Every piece of legislation, we've been looking at what do we need to do? What will be the impact in terms of the impact assessment? What will be the analysis in relation to the imports that might come in consequence of the changes that we're making? And how should we respond to that? What should be done? So it's very much, I would say now, ingrained in the DNA of our policy making that we take that into account. Of course, the response depends very much on a given situation. The problem is that in WTO, you can't say, I'm doing this because otherwise it's unfair competition. because that's not one of the reasons why you can do it, no? So you have to be much more sophisticated with your justifications. So on something like animal welfare, the one argument that is valid in the WTO side is this question of ethics and morals and how your public thinks about certain practices and so on. So that had been taken into account. And it will be taken into account as we move forward with the proposals. I'm sure of that.
Okay, and look, maybe one last question from myself. Can you give us any indication what you're going to be bringing forward in the animal transport legislation? And a kind of a slightly related question, but are you considering any the last question was about importing, feed into the European Union and looking for similar standards. But when we export animals out of the European Union, have you any thoughts about the welfare requirements of the destination country?
Okay, so on that point, first, we already have actually some court jurisprudence which says we need to think about the fact that, the requirements should apply from the start to the very end, even if it's outside the EU. Obviously, that becomes quite difficult in terms of making sure that those standards are applied in practice. But it's very much something that we will take into account. I think it's a bit difficult at this point in time where we are to give you details on the transport. I think I would just refer you back to the fact that obviously there were various concerns raised in the European Parliament, and we're out there about how long the animals are transported for. We have updated advice from EFSA about the length of travel, the conditions of the travel, the heat, what temperatures, and how we can make sure that animals are not, and fortunately this summer there were not any big issues, but the summer before there were animals trapped in heat conditions which are horrible. And then there's also the question of space as well, in terms of how much space is needed. So those are things we're looking at. It's still very much being worked on at the moment. We have to discuss with our regulatory scrutiny board who look at all our impact assessments, so we're in the middle of doing that, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the areas that we're
And when will we see those?
Well, at the moment, the timing, and this is public, so I'm not giving you a scoop, it's programmed for the 6th of December, but whether we can meet that will depend, again, on whether we can satisfy the impact assessment board and others that we've properly calculated all the costs. It's been, because this was part of a much bigger exercise, we've had to extract data from a bigger piece about, which looked at the kept animals, which looked at the slaughter, which looked at labelling and everything else as well. So it's just taking a bit of time to make sure that we've got solid figures there. But there is a very strong political commitment to come forward with this now before Christmas. The EVP, Sefcovic, said it to the Parliament. And I know that the commissioners are keen to do it on the 6th if that's at all possible. So I think that's as much as I can say for the moment.
Very good. Well, listen, thank you very much, Claire, for coming this morning. You have a very, very broad agenda, as I said, lots of things, and lots of things that I think, we'd all think are important aspects of having a sustainable livestock system. And I suppose for us, the desire is that, science is used as much as possible in terms of basing decisions and changes, and that the agenda, all of these issues that you talked about, they do open up a huge, there are still lots of knowledge gaps in those areas, and that's the role that Animal Task Force and its members can play in terms of filling some of those knowledge gaps. So thank you very much, Claire. And
Thank you very much. It's very nice to see you all. Have a good day, and I look forward to hearing, where the gaps are and what we do going forward. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we're going to move on now, and the next couple of papers deal with the area of what are the most appropriate tools and how do we use them to measure sustainability. So our first presentation is from Hayo van der Werf from INRAE, and Hayo has a doctorate in agronomic and environmental sciences from Wageningen and works at INRAE. Main area of interest is environmental system analysis, in particular the methodology and application of life cycle assessment in agricultural systems. And he's going to talk about LCA and the advantages and the limits. So over to you, Hayo.
A great pleasure and the honor for me to be here to tell you a little bit about life cycle assessment in the capital of Europe. So you may see that I modified the title a little bit, Strengths and Challenges, to put it a bit more positively. Now, how do I... c'est ça. Okay, so my presentation will be in 5 parts. First, briefly, what is LCA? Then its strengths, the challenges it faces, and then an example to illustrate all this on LCA of biodiversity-friendly cattle systems. So what is LCA? Here you have a definition from the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. It's a structured, comprehensive, and internationally standardized method. It quantifies all relevant emissions and resources consumed and the related environmental and health impacts, as well as resource depletion issues that are associated with any goods or services. You can call that products. Now, another way to put it is it's a way to integrate a lot of knowledge. And I should say that I'm speaking here about environmental life cycle assessment. So this is about the environmental pillar of sustainability. It's not about social, it's not about economic. So you can say it's the objective is to assess the environmental impacts of human activities, and it's applied across different economic sectors. You can say also it's a model of a complex reality. First, you have a set of models to estimate pollutant emissions and resource use of a product or a service, and then another set of models to translate those pollutant emissions and resource uses into environmental impact indicators. Now, of course, models are a simplification of reality, so LCA claims to assess potential impacts. 2 key features. It considers the product life cycle, and I will come back to that, what is a life cycle, and it gives a set of impact indicators, so it's a multi-criteria impact assessment. Now, here you have an example of a life cycle of a bicycle. You may think that if you go from one place to another on a bike, there's no impact at all because you don't have exhaust gases or whatever. But if you think about it a little bit more, then you will realize that in order to have this bicycle, well, you need a bicycle factory. You need a factory that produces the raw materials, and you need mines where you extract the raw materials. And unfortunately, bicycles don't live eternally, so there is also an issue of end of life of the bicycle. Now, if we translate this to the issue that we are interested in, farms and food, here you see the main phases of the LCA of a so-called cradle to farm gate LCA. So from the start, not until the end of the product, but until the exit of the farm. First step is you define the system. And in this case, it will be what happens on the farm and all the inputs used on that farm. So the production of these inputs and also their transport to the farm. Second phase, and that's the one that takes the most time, is the so-called inventory analysis. And here you will draw up a table of all relevant pollutant emissions and resource uses. So this can be a table with hundreds of lines because we have lots of substances, nitrate, ammonia, methane, pesticides, etc., as well as resource use, oil, land, and more of that. And then the next phase, the impact assessment phase, this information from the inventory table is aggregated into a much smaller number of impact indicators. So, for instance, all greenhouse gases are expressed as CO2 equivalents, and it gives you the so-called climate change impact indicator, also called carbon footprint. And then you see there is another set of indicators given here, and some methods supply up to 15 or 16 different impact indicators. Now, this shows you the use of LCA in peer-reviewed scientific studies, and you see that in 2018 we had like a bit over 1,000 publications that use life cycle assessment to assess agriculture and food products. So it's really a tool that is, and a method that is more and more used. And here is an example what you can do with life cycle assessment. Here you see a comparison of 4 diets based on French consumption patterns expressed for a single indicator, climate change expressed as CO2 equivalents per day. And you can see that, well, for an average French person, which eats an average French diet, climate change impact is about 6 kilogram of CO2 equivalent per day. And on the other end, if you have a vegetarian diet, it's a little bit above 4. And this picture also shows you that LCA can give you an idea of the contribution of the different foods. So this shows which food contribute to this impact. So it's a tool to analyze the system you're studying. So let's have a look at the strengths of LCA. I think its first strength is that it produces a kind of balance sheet of a system. It puts on the one hand products and services provided, and on the other hand environmental impacts. The fact that the whole or part of the life cycle is considered is clearly a strength. The fact that it is multi-criteria means that you can identify what we call burden shifting. So if we do an LCA of the system of interest, and we find out which are the so-called hotspots, which are the parts of the system that contribute a lot to the impacts. And then we think of ways to modify the system. We can run the LCA again, and for instance, our objective may be to decrease greenhouse gas emissions. But since we look at a range of impacts, we can see whether decreasing greenhouse gas emissions does not have an effect on other impacts, may increase other impacts, so-called burden shifting. Well, it's a science-based, transparent, standardized, and international method that works for all kinds of economic sectors. Since it's science-based, it continuously integrates new scientific knowledge, and that's why I speak of challenges rather than limits. There's lots of software and databases available, and it can then very well be used for eco-design of products or systems. Now, what about the challenges? With 2 colleagues, we published this paper called Towards Better Representation of Organic Agriculture in Life Cycle Assessment, because we are of the idea that life cycle assessment has a hard time to fairly, let's say, assess less intensive agroecological organic systems. And there's first some data. Here you have data from a publication from 2017, which compares organic and conventional for a certain number of impacts per kilogram of product. And in fact, this study shows that per kilogram of food, organic systems need more land. Well, that's not a scoop, because yields are lower in organic systems. They cause more eutification, they use less energy, and they have similar climate change impacts. So basically, when you use LCA to assess, to compare organic and conventional, you get the impression that they're not so very different. This is based on another paper for a single impact, climate change impact, but here we show for a range of products the difference in impact between organic and conventional, first per hectare, and then you see that although results are quite variable, overall per hectare of land used, organic systems have less impact. Quite logical because they use less inputs. But since the yield is lower, per quantity of product, impact of organic products for the climate change pact is slightly higher. Now, so this was one of the issues we wanted to treat. Agroecology or less intensive systems are a challenge for LCA. Here we have a representation a bit, well, maybe a bit, well, I don't find the word in English, but it's a bit extreme opposition between intensive specialist agriculture, which basically has a single objective, which is producing kilograms of food, and on the other hand, agroecological system, as represented here by organic farming, which produces food, feed, but which has other advantages, such as it's better for biodiversity, water quality, animal welfare, and may also be better for soil quality. So the first challenge that LCA is facing, in our opinion, is that it has often a narrow perspective on the function of agricultural systems. Initially, it's a product-based approach, so by default, impacts will be given per kilogram of product. And this favors intensive high-yield conventional systems, which per unit of area have more impact, but also more yield, and may have less impact per kilogram of product, in particular for land use and, for instance, eutrophication. Also, it's difficult, although it's increasingly tried, to consider the quality of a product, because the quality of a product between an intensive system and a less intensive system may not be the same. And so this means, in fact, that the so-called territorial function of agriculture is ignored. So what can we do about this challenge? Well, first of all, not only express impacts per kilogram of product, but also per unit area, and consider combining LCA and ecosystem services approach, because less intensive systems often provide more ecosystem services. Another issue is that in many LCA studies, certain important environmental issues are not considered. We know that organic farming compared to conventional farming on average is better for biodiversity, uses less pesticides, and is better for soil quality. But relatively few LCA studies consider impacts on biodiversity, pesticide impacts, or soil quality. So as a result, the comparisons may well be unbalanced. And the third one is a bit more complicated. This is indirect effects of switching to organic farming. Here you see another illustration that shows on the left conventional farming that uses half the amount of land to produce 1 ton of grain. And then it is sometimes reasoned the other half of the land can be used for nature. Now, so the reasoning is if you move to less intensive systems, you will have a lower yield, you will need more land, and in the end, this will contribute to what's called land use change or deforestation. Now, we think that this reasoning is far too simplistic. Because models for assessing land use change are not very well suited to the shift to lower yield systems. It does not consider at all public policy effects, such as aims on greenhouse gas reduction, forest protection. It does not consider potential changes in diet, and it does not consider so-called rebound effects, because products, organic products and products from lower input systems often are of higher quality and are more expensive, so people will buy less of them. And, well, the moral of this challenge here is that if indirect effects are included, then results should be interpreted very carefully because the uncertainty is very high. Now, and to round up this presentation, I will give you a little presentation of a recent study, a PhD study we did on biodiversity-friendly cattle systems. And here you see a picture of two of the farms involved. On the left, you have the Nep farm in the UK, and on the right, Trévin farm in France. So we have these 4 cattle farms, which represent a range of intensiveness, so to say. On the one extreme, we have the Nep farm. It's agricultural rewilding with the objective to restore ecological processes while producing a small amount of meat. So big emphasis on restoration of biodiversity. On the other hand, we have the Derval farm in Brittany in France, which is like a classic dairy farm. It's an experimental farm, so it's on getting data on milking using new technologies and energy transition. And in between, you have farms that are more onto preserving biodiversity, agroecology, and we calculated a so-called biodiversity potential score, and you see it can take a value between 1 and 0, and this quite well illustrates the range of systems we had here. Some more details on these farms. For instance, you look at the line diesel consumption liter per hectare per year. It is 1 liter per hectare per year in the Nep farm, where the animals are completely taking care of themselves. There is no stables, they are out all the year. And at Derval, it's 100 liters. Very big range in stocking rate, quite a big range in time of year spent outside, and, well, obviously also a very big range in animal protein produced, be it animal protein from milk or meat. The first 2 farms only produce meat, the other 2 farms produce both milk and meat. Now, what do we see when we apply an LCA to this? First, here you have results per hectare of land use, and you see that, well, the ranking is for these 3 impacts, climate change, marine eutrophication associated with nitrate loss, and energy demand. It's lowest and even negative for climate change for the Nep farm and highest for the classic farm. So very clearly, per hectare of land use, the more intensive your farm, the higher the impacts. However, when you express impacts per kilogram of animal protein, it's a bit of a mixed picture. Derval and Trévin are best for land occupation and marine eutrophication, whereas Nep is best for climate change and energy demand. So, and when you see these results, you can, I think, wonder whether expressing impacts per kilogram of product makes sense for these very extensive systems, which have other objectives than just producing kilograms of food. And one way to move forward on this is, and there's a lot of work going on this subject, is to express impacts not only for, as you see here, relating impacts to kilograms of product, but also relating some of these impacts to the provision of ecosystem services, which is higher for these low-intensity farms than for the high-intensity farms. And this is a way to address their multifunctionality. Now, and then I will conclude. Strengths of LCA, it's science-based, transparent, international framework. It allows for multi-criteria environmental impact assessment, and scientific advancements are regularly integrated. So there's a lot of criticisms of LCA, and rightly so, but these over time are taken into account in order to improve the framework. Challenges, well, narrow perspective on function of agricultural systems. Some environmental issues are neglected or insufficiently considered, and modeling of indirect effects is inconsistent. And recommendations, well, what can be done right away is expressing impacts not only per kilogram of product, but also per hectare of land use. combine LCA and ecosystem services approach because these approaches are complementary. Assess land degradation, biodiversity, and pesticide effects. And if you take into account indirect effects, be very careful when interpreting these results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hayo. So look, you'll come back to us for the panel discussion, so we won't take any questions after these presentations. So thank you very much for that. We're going to go now for 3 short presentations, the first of which is going to be delivered by Harald Sverdrup from inland Norway, University of Applied Sciences. And Harald, in the interest of time, I'm not going to say anything except that you're an expert about you, and we're delighted to have you here today, and you're going to talk to us on the topic of better than LCA for evaluating agricultural production, a systems analysis because methods matter, the Nordic case. So over to you. Look forward to your presentation.
Yes, I'm pleased to be here. So I come from the Nordic countries, and if you see the picture behind me, we're proud of the farms that look like the one up here, but most of the farms look like this and this. And this is the reality we have, and this is necessary to take in. Which one is here and there? Of course, we know why we're here. Animal part of agriculture is being blamed for a lot of different things. And it's also being allocated blame to them within a whole system, acting as a scapegoat within the system. I think this is part of why we've been using deficient methods, but also because there's been a mixture in this debate about pure opinion, political belief, and facts. And we need to drive it now back to facts-based decision-making, and religious beliefs don't really have any place in that. So what is agriculture? Well, to us, it's a system. It's a whole system. It's not a single thing. It's not a single product factory. It's a very integrated thing. And also the sustainability of it is the ability of this system to persist over long, long times. We've been running farms in Norway for 5,000 to 6,000 years, and we have all intentions to do it for an equal amount of time. And so it's going to be there. The perspective of sustainability is for the present and future generations. The future generations are very many more than us. So from when we started to now, there's about 300 generations. Okay, so we need to get the perspective. 4 years is not long time. 40 years is also not long time. 140 years is still short term. Take it in. And it means also when we look at then impacts of the system, sustainability system, it's about the whole system. It's not about single parts. You can look at your clock, for instance, and you can open it up and you can ask, so which wheel inside my clock is to blame for the time? Well, it's the very wrong question. The whole system is creating the output. And this is where we need to get to. And methods matter. So I've seen very many sustainability studies, and very few of them define what sustainability is beyond just nice fairy tale intentions. Now, if we're going to make policy, that's not good enough. It needs to come down to quantifiable numbers. So sustainability, when we make decisions, need to be quantifiable. It needs to be numbers. We need to set standards, goals that we need to meet up to. And we need to compare that to the state we have now. And that's a gap. Becoming more sustainable is about gap closure. We need to be able to measure it so we can see whether we succeed or not. So it needs to be quantitative. So if you see a sustainability assessment and it's not quantitative, it's not a sustainability assessment. That's a demand we need to put on it. And reports that don't fulfill that are not acceptable. And it needs to be mass balance consistent, needs to be energy consistent. This is bookkeeping. If your costs and income and so doesn't add up, and you take away parts in it, it isn't valid. This demands that we do systems analysis. So there are different ways to define sustainability, and we go through it. Liebig's principles, Shelford's law of the ecological niche, diminishing returns. There's no 100% efficiency. Social parts and economic parts are important as well. They need to be included. And it means also making systems analysis, looking at the whole system and how things are connected. As soon as you have more than 2 parameters involved, linearity is gone. There are feedbacks in the system, and this needs to be included. It makes all the lines bend. And this we combine with the management plan that exists on farms. The reality of the system and the numbers need to be included in the plan that actually is used on the farms. There are such plans today. What the farmer does every day, he has it on his PC up in his office. Needs to link to that. If it doesn't link to that, there is no link to the farmer. He doesn't know what to do when he gets out in the morning. In the Nordic agriculture, we have a lot of different diversity in different types of land areas that the farmers use. Up in the north, we're talking about Arctic agriculture. There are a lot of varieties on different assets you use, and it's a puzzle of using every square meter you have to make all your resources meet all ends. It all comes together. Now, we're down here in Central Europe. We're often up here. So this is fields that you farm. This is fodder. These are forests even. We use our forests also in agriculture. Can't take them away. The cows are in there. So taking them away, you take away an important part in your bookkeeping. Now, if you go to your auditor, he doesn't accept it. You go to the tax office, they fine you for it. Well, we can't do that in our calculations then. It's bogus. So we need to stop doing that. We need to have the whole system in. I've looked at some of these climate calculators that's been used now in the Nordic countries. I'm sorry, when they come in for inspection, we take number plates off. They're not good enough. They're missing huge parts. They're not mass balance consistent. And large parts of what's being used on the farm isn't in there. And then they only book the negative for the animals, and everything else is taken somewhere else. Now I get upset. So we post all the positives to the broccoli and all the negatives to the cow. We've done this for 30 years. I think it needs to stop now. Or we can turn the tables, okay? Let's post all the negatives for broccoli and all the positives for the cows. Now you're a climate enemy if you eat broccoli. Or is this how we're going to run things? No, it isn't. We need to have a systems approach. And we also need to address the time perspective, which isn't in. So our cows is a very integrated part of the system. I had the pleasure of living 5 years in Iceland. And in Iceland, everything is pushed to the point. In Iceland, we cannot grow anything you would like to put in your mouth. You can't eat sedges and grass and lichens. We have some friends that can do that. Then we eat our friends. This is the reality. This is how Icelandic diet has been now since 871 when they first arrived there. The ones that didn't comply with this didn't make it to the spring. And so let me go back. So we need to do proper mass balances. We need to include the whole system. You know, the fields, the animals, the interaction between the animals, how that goes back and forth, all the mass balances. We need to do this for carbon. We need to do it for nitrogen. We need to do it for phosphorus. You always need to do those three together. If you don't, well, then you're missing essential parts. You have to go home and redo it. You have to do it in the LCAs, but you also have to do it in dynamic simulations. The difference here between LCA and dynamic calculation is that some of the things that you put in an LCA come at very different times. And when you look at the whole system, they can come 30, 40 years apart. Then it becomes quite problematic to put them in the same calculation and pull them all to the same time. You may miss by 30, 40 years or more. If we look at calculations like this done on the whole in Norway and Sweden, we see that if we shift away animals and try to grow more plants, actually the loss in nutrient production, protein production, is very much less. So the losses are very much larger than the increase we can do in plants. We can't compensate because we don't have the liberty to substitute everything with crop. So if you take away animals, it's a permanent loss in productivity and a permanent loss in supply to the country. And for the Nordic countries, the self-sufficiency degree goes down in Norway from 50% to 14%. So it's out of the question. It's a defense issue. It's a national security issue. We're not going to do it. And actually, the integrated system in Norway, the farms, they own 77% of the forest, is the largest carbon sequestration machine we have in the country. You take away the animals, you take away capacity within that sequestration machinery. Okay, so what do? If you take away the animals from Nordic country, you're doing a huge climate change damage. Don't do it. So these are my conclusions, but I think my time is up. I promise to keep time.
Thank you very much. I've no doubt we will return to that during our discussion, Harald, but thank you for now, and we'll move on to our next presentation, which is a quick overview of the Pathways project, and the project coordinator, Laurence from University of Reading and SLU is going to give us that. So over to you, Laurence.
Great, yeah, thank you very much. So thanks for inviting me here today. It's a great privilege to be able to present to you all. So I have a dual affiliation in Sweden and the UK, which is really helpful for Eurovision. It's not so good for the rugby, but I'm not going to talk about that. So. But I'll give you a quick overview of the Pathways project, which I'm coordinating. And this one is it? Oh, the red. Oh, thanks. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, so what is Pathways? So it's a 5-year initiative that's funded under Horizon 2020. And it's coordinated by SLU. There's about 31 partners all across Europe. And we have a very strong multi-actor consortium, so we have very good engagement from the industry right across the food sector. And the overarching aim is we're informing policy, research and business strategies in support of livestock production and consumption that's sustainable moving forward. And we started on the 1st of September 2021. And the objectives are shown here. So one of our key aims is to really address some of the limitations we've heard about today around life cycle assessment and other methods to improve those approaches for livestock systems. And we're applying those improved methods to learn from innovative case studies of livestock production in Europe. And we're also co-designing scenarios for the future of livestock in Europe, and that's a key activity. So we're assessing those scenarios with these improved methods and supporting a transition to sustainability in livestock in Europe. So you can see with this bow tie image, we're looking at various phases of work, which we've just come to the end of the second phase of. So we're about halfway through this initiative now. So I'm just going to focus on one of the aspects now, which is the scenarios that we've been building through this participatory engagement with industry and academics across Europe. So we've been developing these 5 scenarios or narratives for the future of livestock systems. The first of which has been derived this feed no food scenario or narrative, which suggests that the future of livestock has no foods that are suitable for human consumption integrated within its production systems. So it's a sort of agroecological approach, pasture-fed approach to livestock. The second is a sort of sustainable intensification scenario, which follows this industrial ecology thinking around more from less production, more from less inputs. The third scenario that we've been developing is on a rural renaissance. So this is thinking about restructuring the food system towards shorter supply chains in particular and more farmer empowerment, greater autonomy for farmers in that context, supplying also a range of ecosystem services through diversity. And the fourth scenario we've been developing is on high animal welfare. So this is in particular maximizing the positive experience for animals in this scenario through improved enrichment and housing design. And then the fifth scenario is really a sort of counterfactual for the others, and this is a stock-free Europe. So, and we're looking at this scenario from the point of view of what do we lose if we didn't have livestock in Europe relative to the others. So as I say, this is very much looking at it from a counterfactual perspective in terms of what we stand to lose from livestock in the food system, or an absence thereof. So those are the scenarios we're working with our modelling approaches and other methods in the pathways work. Another key aspect of work has been the characterisation of the current livestock system so we can compare these scenarios to a baseline. And this has been achieved through bringing together diverse data sets shown here, so Eurostat, FADN data, plus survey data from experts across Europe. And this characterization is allowing us to sort of say, okay, so what does livestock currently look like? So, for example, with dairy systems in Europe. So this is just an example, but we've covered all livestock types within Europe through this very detailed analysis. And it allows us to have a baseline, as I say, which we can compare against. Another aspect of the work is specifically focused on life cycle assessment and trying to improve the LCA method. So we've been consulting with experts within industry and within academia as well around how we can assess life cycle analysis methods appropriately. So through a series of focus groups and an online survey, we looked at existing frameworks that are used for the evaluation of indicators more generally within sustainability assessments in Europe. And through a prioritization following a sort of Delphi approach, these experts came up with this list of the key criteria we should be looking at when we're assessing the adequacy of LCA within livestock. And this relates to the criteria shown here. So transparency, reproducibility, completeness, and fairness and acceptance, and robustness. And in particular, key aspects of this relate to the inclusion of uncertainty assessments within the work and suitable documentation of the approach, so it's transparent and reproducible. We also defined this separate accuracy criteria around the validation of the LCA, so making sure that there's empirical observations that sit alongside the model predictions to validate the work that's carried out. And several experts also commented that timescales, as we've heard earlier, are a key aspect, particularly on carbon sequestration, that need to be addressed in future life cycle assessments. The other key aspect is around the independence of LCA. So often prioritization was given for frameworks and assessment techniques that are linked to particular initiatives like product environmental footprint guidelines, rather than necessarily the quality of the method itself. So that was the result from the LCA evaluation criteria assessment. But another piece of work is looking at the LCA methods that have been used in peer-reviewed literature to date. And it's the reviews that we've conducted kind of summarized quite nicely on this image here. Where perhaps it's a little bit small, but you can see that essentially we're pretty good at capturing these green lines where we have the sort of linear processes that capture the impacts of imports to the agricultural system around the production of fertilizer, the use of feed, etc. But we're less good at capturing these red lines, which represent the sort of circular aspects of the food system. So in particular, the recycling of waste back into agricultural systems and the use of byproducts from processing industries within livestock feeding systems. And yeah, really capturing these circular aspects is a key focus of the work, and we're doing this again through review and consultation, and we're focusing on these key topics through this activity, which will hopefully address some of the concerns that we've heard about earlier today around the suitability of LCA. And we'll be applying these improved methods to these baseline systems that I showed earlier, but also to case studies of innovation in Europe. So key next steps or challenges, I should perhaps say, for the project are translating these quite qualitative scenarios into numbers. So we're working with a range of models within the project at a macroeconomic level with Magnet, at a regional level with the SOL models on the left-hand side there, and then at a value chain level with the life cycle assessment approach. And at a more qualitative level, we're also applying these scenarios or narratives to future value chains and food baskets, again, through a more qualitative interaction with consumers and other stakeholders. There's also online surveys within this work. Next steps as well are bringing together evaluations of case studies in Europe. So we've collected data from about 100 innovative livestock producers across Europe, and they're innovating in various ways from sort of agroecology to agri-tech. And we're very keen to learn from these innovations through this data that's been brought in. This is an example of the analysis that we're going to be doing. This is actually from a previous project where we were looking at correlations and relationships across diverse indicators such as grassland species richness and spend on veterinary medicines. So looking at these kind of relationships, I think is really important and can deliver some quite key messages for policy in terms of where the trade-offs are and where the synergies are as well. So next steps as well relate to the communication of our outputs. So we're continually updating our website, the Pathways Project website, and we're having a webinar series which has just started actually, where we're bringing together experts from across the livestock community, like the Global Research Alliance on agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, who contributed to the last webinar. And then on the 7th of March next year, we have a midterm forum here in Brussels where we'll be presenting results from the scenario evaluations, among other things, and a policy toolkit will come in the latter phase of the project where we'll be condensing the outputs of those evaluations in a sort of user-friendly format. So in summary, we're very much focused on these scenarios in Pathways, the aim being that we can identify routes forward for the development of livestock in Europe through this holistic evaluation approach. Improved methods are needed for this, in particular on LCA, and a key challenge here relates to the capture of circular systems and feedback loops in models. The other aspect is these innovation assessments I haven't had time to talk about today, but we're learning from innovative practitioners through this case study approach, which we think can deliver key messages for what works in particular socio-technical and socio-ecological contexts. So make sure you engage with the project, and hope to see you on the 7th of March. And the best way to keep track is to follow us on social media, sign up to our LinkedIn and X, formerly Twitter page, as well as the Pathways website. So thank you.
Thanks, Laurence, and I think that is going to be a very important project for informing policymakers around what direction we need to take livestock production in the EU. So we'll probably come back to you during the panel discussion, but I'm going to move on to our last presentation, which is a quick update on another project that's just about to start or has just been funded, which is Step Up project, which is going to be presented by my own colleague David Kenny from Teagasc in Ireland, who's the project coordinator of that. Big button moves it on.
The green.
Big green button.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Frank, and good morning, everybody. And I want to just, I suppose, start by thanking ATF for giving me the opportunity to just give you a very brief introduction to this project, which is due to start in a number of weeks' time, around the 1st of January. So this project emanated from Cluster 6 of the Horizon Europe programme, and it's not lost to me that the actual original vision, we'll say, for this particular project was articulated here on this very stage about 3 years ago by the Director General of DG Agri, Wolfgang Boscher. So it was very nice to see it actually, to be translated essentially into the call text very quickly afterwards. So essentially, I suppose, and again going back to Harald's point, this project Step Up, it really revolves around the generation of data and metrics, because that's absolutely essential you know, in terms of policy making. And it's, in conjunction with that, you know, it's really, I suppose, central to the science policy interface, you know, and all the major actors within that, you know, from primary producers right through, we'll say, to policy makers. So then in terms of background, the project itself, it's a research and innovation action. There are 16 partners in total, 10 research providing organizations and 6 industry representative bodies across 10 European countries. The overall budget is in the region of 5 million, and it's a 4-year project, which, as I say, will start in January of next year. So then just to give you a very brief context as to why, I suppose, that the Commission are interested, obviously, in this area. You know, obviously, we'll say we're all well aware, we'll say, of the relative value, we'll say, of livestock production within Europe, consisting of about 40% of total agricultural activity or output. Indeed, you know, in terms of that market will increase dramatically over the coming years, and by 2050, it's projected to increase by anything up to 60 to 70%. But obviously, sustainable livestock-based systems, they contribute to food security and environmental stewardship and socio-cultural needs are vital, really, we'll say, for achieving most of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I know those latter concepts, we'll say, are very central to the thematic areas, we'll say, that ATF will be involved in next year. And increasing sustainability, the viability, the resilience, we'll say, of climate-friendly agricultural production systems. They're key objectives of the EU Farm-to-Fork strategy. And again, they're totally consistent as well with the 4 betters as outlined by the and conceptualized by the FAO. However, despite this, there are several challenges that face the development of such sustainable pan-European livestock production systems. And again, you know, obviously there's a global trend there for greater demand for livestock-derived products, but this is being challenged in by, you know, perceived major issues, including its impact, obviously, in the environment and biodiversity, and also the intensive use, would say, of resources. Ethical issues, and they've been already mentioned this morning, would say, particularly in relation to animal welfare, and obviously human health concerns related to the consumption, would say, of some livestock products. And a central issue, we'll say, with many of these costs are ultimately, we'll say, these externalities, that they're not monetized, essentially. They're not reflected in market prices. And as a consequence, then, they're never really properly considered within the decision-making process. And indeed, some preliminary work from the Food Cost EU Horizon project would suggest that some of these costs or externalities could be up to about double the market value currently of food itself. So monetization of the externalities relating to livestock production, this is, I suppose, is absolutely required, we'll say, and it's an absolute central tenet of the Step Up project. So then the overall objectives of Step Up would be, in order to address, I suppose, the many challenges, as I mentioned, facing European livestock production, the overall objective then is to provide policymakers, and again, they're the central actors, we'll say, within, I suppose, the focus of Step Up, with robust evidence on the impacts and externalities and their monetized values for livestock farming as part of the overall food system, a wider ecosystem. And the overall research approach then, I suppose, we first of all need to know what we know, essentially. So we're going to accumulate using, you know, meta-analysis and other, we'll say, scientific approaches, both the positive and negative impacts of the various externalities for European livestock production systems, you know, from the literature and foresight projects, and essentially any other valuable, we'll say, research base. The data gaps then hopefully will be identified from that, and sustainable livestock production systems within Europe across diverse and social, I suppose, geographical areas. And that would be absolutely important, that whatever we do is representative of the wide array of different production systems across the various species, would say, ranging throughout Europe. And that this in combination then with the utilization of case studies, where we hope to identify, and we have already identified some very interesting and innovative approaches, essentially, would say, to livestock production and food production, you know, and to learn from those and integrate some of that knowledge then, would say, into, I suppose, the formulation of better and more sustainable, more standardized, we'll call it, systems going forward. Indicators will be absolutely important, and particularly for those, we'll call it traits or measurements that are not routinely measured. And particularly within, we'll say, the FADN network, for example, that's becoming more and more important in terms of, moving away just, from econometric essentially measures within farm viability. And we're particularly interested here in developing metrics around biodiversity and also animal welfare, and other environmental related outcomes. So that will be a big part, we'll say, of the research piece within the STEP Up project. And obviously the multi-actor approach is absolutely key. So there's going to be, to and fro, obviously, negotiation and discussion, we'll say, on the basis of projects, the project and its development. And at the core of the project, we'll say, will be many workshops and with all the various actors within the system. Obviously, we'll say then, looking at, we'll say, the monetization of that. So that's obviously, we'll say, a major issue, and we were going to use, we'll say, a lot of the main econometric models that are in conjunction with social LCA as well, trying to, I suppose, as I say, monetize that, but capture the overall, we'll say, both the positives and negative, we'll say, impacts and externalities of the systems. And then finally, we'll say, ultimately, I suppose, the objective is to provide a unique and what we feel a warranted platform, let's say, to support the development of informed, objective policy measures to optimize the central role of livestock in terms of meeting the nutritional and socioeconomic needs, let's say, of the European and indeed the global population. So this graph just shows, we'll say, I suppose visually, we'll say what we mean. I'm not going to go through it again, but ultimately we need, I suppose, the start of the project is the necessity, we'll say, to understand the changes required. So that's going to require thorough investigation of the, I suppose, published knowledge at the moment, culminating essentially then in terms of, I suppose, the development, we'll say, of new and more sustainable systems. Again, as I said, the case studies will be integral to that. And we're going to try to hopefully learn, we'll say, from existing. And there's a lot of innovation, throughout the continent being used and across all the various food production systems, going from very artisan type systems right through, we'll say, to, farmer processor interaction and strong partnerships. So again, as you can see there from the graph, we've about 15 identified, but again, we'd love to work, we'll say, with people here in the room and others, we'll say, to develop more of these, in terms of informing, I suppose, the project as we go forward. I mentioned already we're going to use, I suppose, existing modelling platforms, which are useful, we'll say, from the basis of regional modelling, we'll say the impact at a regional level, at an EU level, and also at a global level. But there's also, I suppose, a strong research piece within STEP Up in terms of, further embellishing or improving those models so that they can capture better, we'll say, the intricacies, essentially, we'll say, of the data that we, and particularly the integration of those, those indicator traits that we've been talking about. John Louis just mentioned this particular concept, the safe and just operating space, and this is something that's been led by Hervé Guillemard at INRAE. And it's something that's only relatively recently, I suppose, applied, we'll say, to the agriculture or agri-food sector. But I suppose ultimately, we'll say, the idea is that the SJOS concept, it includes, I suppose, biophysical tipping points with social science considerations, and ultimately we're very much focused on equity and justice. So in other words, the concept around that small little changes can have exaggerated effects. So again, within that, and particularly, we'll say, from the point of view, we'll say, of changes, we'll say, to a particular livestock system, what are the essential, cumulative effects of that, we'll say, on other externalities. And again, we'll work very closely with the Bright Space project, which again is, utilises this, and this SJOS concept is at the core of that one. So targeted groups, I mentioned those already, going from right through to farmers, we'll say, to policymakers, and ultimately to consumers, we'll say, and the public at large as well, so that everybody, everybody's, I suppose, view is captured within the project. And to finish up, we're going to be very closely aligned with a number of, existing Horizon Europe funded projects. And again, we have, and Laurence is integrally involved in leading the work package within STEP Up, We have a number of the coordinators and key players within these projects already, leading tasks and work packages within Step Up. So, we hope to learn from those projects, and hopefully equally that we will contribute to those as well. So there'll be a totally integrated and holistic approach across this, and obviously, yielding better dividends, we'll say, for the European taxpayer in terms of covering the cost of these projects. So with that, I'll just complete, and these are the list of the various actors that are and partners within the project. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, David, and good luck to you and all the others involved in that very important project. So look, we've come to the end of this session, and to try to summarise it is challenging, but I think the livestock systems are complex. I think that comes across clear, and that simple, singular evaluations that we might make are inadequate. And it's great to see we've lots of suggestions and as to how to improve the evaluation, and lots of research going on to develop better methods and to better understand the role of livestock in our food system. But I guess, we can't wait for all that research forever. Policymakers need to make policy now. So we have a role as scientists to give them our best assessment of, so that they can base those policies on best available science. And indeed, farmers can't wait, because they need to be future-proofing their systems and reacting to all this policy. So our next session is going to look at what is happening at farm level, and what are farmers doing in practice, particularly around greenhouse gas mitigation, but I think we'll touch on other aspects of the system that contribute to their overall sustainability as well. So we'll break for coffee before we get into that. We're running 10 minutes late, so we'll start at 10 past, because I think we've already used some of our discussion time with Claire, so I think we need the coffee time. I do anyway. So we'll come back at 10 past 11. So thank you. So Harland, will you join us on the panel discussion? Will you join us on the panel discussion?